Good morning to all of you, and thanks for spending some of your time with us this morning. I have sat on the editorial board of the Tennessee Bar Journal for several years, and I've learned a lot by doing it. I've learned a lot not only in the law. I am primarily a divorce lawyer, and I do federal court international abduction under the Hague Convention. But I have a very narrow scope of what I do. But as an editorial board member, I am reading across all the areas of law. Can't hear? How do we turn it up? Any ideas? He's doing it back there? All right, thank you. Appreciate it. So I'm reading across all areas of law, and we watch lots of really good writing come in, and we also watch lots of really crummy, poorly thought out writing come in. So if you're interested in getting an article published with the Tennessee Bar Journal, I've got some tips for you. And the first question is, well, why would you want to do that? You've heard Laura talk a little bit about why it's important to get some content out there with your name on it. But of course, mostly you want to do it for the glory and the grandeur, right? 12,000, 13,000 lawyers are going to read whatever it is you've written if you've gotten through the editorial process and gotten published. Or, Hollywood might notice you and pick you up. It's happened here in Memphis with a couple of judges. Anyway, or here's another idea, for you to address a problem or a difficult situation that you see in the law. And that's really what we're looking for. We want you to get the glory and the grandeur, and we hope Hollywood calls. But what we really want you to do is to educate us so that we can educate the rest of the lawyers across the state on something that's bothering you, something, some cases that are in conflict, that sort of thing. Or maybe you've read a great book about an interesting lawyer or a case or an element of history that had some kind of legal relationship to it. I heard an incredible talk last weekend in Hot Springs at the Arkansas Bar Convention on the Holocaust and what happened to the judiciary and the judicial system during those years when Hitler was in power through when the Third Reich collapsed. So it doesn't have to be specifically an article of Tennessee law. But we are not going to probably publish, and I say we, and it's not the royal we, it's me. I'm going to vote against because I'm not up here in an official capacity, but I'm not going to be very interested in approving an article that you may have written beautifully on how DUI cases are handled in Wyoming. It's just not, you heard Laura say, consider your audience. You need to consider your audience in these articles as well. So the first thing you got to do is you got to think that through. Is this something that is relevant to Tennessee, or is it relevant to lawyers by virtue of the animals that they are because it's a piece of history or an interesting lawyer? We're also looking often for things to address big changes in law. Not too long ago, all the probate laws changed. Well, we wanted information on that so we could feed it back out. Domestic law has had some big changes earlier in the year at the end of last year, and you will see that there were articles published on that as well. Remember when all the personal injury laws changed and a whole new set of rules on how those lawyers had to handle those cases, and we published on that. So is it something like that that's in flux that needs some attention? If so, write it out and send it to us. Or maybe it is something even softer but important. And you will see us publish things like how lawyers manage or do not manage stress, or organizational tips for a law office or a lawyer who's going to try a certain kind of case, or general organization of files, that sort of thing. Or you'll see us occasionally publish something that includes tips to avoid malpractice. So think broadly about what's going to be interesting and what is it you have to say. I always think one of my favorite authors is Roald Dahl, the children's author. And he said, I don't care if a reader hates one of my stories as long as he finishes the book, right? Well, and that's kind of the way you want to think about this as well. Is the topic you're considering so narrow that only a little tiny handful of lawyers across the state might be interested? Is it too basic? Is it too complicated? Is it some little widget out there in the securities litigation world that only these, handful of lawyers who would ever try that case would be interested in reading it. You've got to think about that, because we're going to think about it as well. And if it comes in too narrow or too obscure, then it's going to get some extra scrutiny, as you can imagine. It's not, I'm not telling you we don't publish it. I'm just saying it gets a lot of extra scrutiny from the editorial board, because we want this magazine to be relevant to as many people as pick it up every month. So another tip is to Google your idea. Has somebody else already written it? If somebody else has already written it, red flag. How recent is it? Is it really close to your idea, such that really the publication of that other author's work would be encompassing of what your point was? Is it too soon? When was that other matter published? And can you find material to take issue with that other article? Or can you find a way to do it a little bit differently? Because what's going to happen is, when you submit an article, and I'm going to tell you how to do it and some guidelines for doing it, but when you submit it, the TBJ staff, which is incredible, is going to research you, and they're going to research your article, and we're going to find whether it's already out there, whether somebody else has already published it, that sort of thing, and we're going to look around for whatever else is out there on that topic too. So we want you to do that on the front end. If you know that that's out there, tell us. Tell us, and then tell us why you've written the article you've written relative to that one, and save everybody that step of, oh, author, I don't know about this. Did you see this article that was written over here, and now you've written this? Is it too close? We think it might be a little too close. So just tell us on the front end, and we'll think it through with you. Let's see. Here's some things that I want you to remember if you're writing for the Tennessee Bar Journal. It's a magazine. It's not a law review publication. It's got to read a little bit easier for somebody to pick it up and read it in their spare time. You're going to read law review articles when you're studying for a case on the point of that article. You're not going to pick it up at home when you're watching the news and read a 20-page single-spaced article with 532 footnotes. It's not going to happen. So while really good writing is important, and I'm going to talk about some of that in a minute, it's also important for the tone to be right for this audience. Now that doesn't mean that it can be poorly done or just sort of off the cuff. That's not what we're talking about here. But it does need to read a little easier than the law review articles, and we don't want to just sit down and feel like we've read a case. So think about it. Make it a little lighter. We love some little subliminal humor in it. We will laugh electronically with you when you've done that, as long as it's appropriate to the circumstance. The crowd's got a really good sense of humor, which is one of my favorite things about this board. But relax a little bit, find some humor perhaps, find an aside, find a fun photo, or as Laura mentioned, a graphic, something that will lighten it just a little bit, and then of course do not footnote it to death. If you send us the basic law review article and it's got the 532 footnotes, guess what? We're going to send it back to you, and we're going to tell you, we liked your content, but you got to get all this over here under control, because otherwise we end up with pages and pages and pages in a magazine of footnotes. And the other thing to remember is, a magazine has limited space. We can't publish like a law review article. There's unlimited space in a law review article typically. You can write until you're through, or you drop dead, or whatever happens. That's not the case with this magazine, and that's why we're so focused on things like hundreds of footnotes or even 50 footnotes, because it takes up space, it's very expensive and non-productive. Now that doesn't mean you can't have any footnotes, and I'm not telling you if you have a lot of footnotes that it's an automatic rejection. I am not saying that. What I'm saying is be thoughtful about it. If you've talked about the statute in your in the body of your paragraph, do you really need to footnote it and cite it at the bottom of a magazine article? You don't. So think very strictly about what you're sending to us in terms of all of that. And then let's talk just a minute about the detail level that you use. As I mentioned, it's not a law review article, but neither is it pablum. You have got to find that sweet spot. You need to have an introductory paragraph that grabs us and then walks us through your thoughts and wraps it up for us at the end. And so it's that sweet spot between this is way too much detail and it's way too basic. You know, we're not going to publish an article on how you do a basic uncontested divorce. You know, it's just, that's too simple. We're not going to publish that article in all likelihood that is so obscure that no one's interested except that same 20 people. It's somewhere in that middle spot. So read it to someone who's not a lawyer. Read it to a young lawyer. Read it to an older lawyer, or let them read it. But think carefully about where that sweet spot is, because it's one of those things that used to be like pornography. We know it when we see it, right? It's you've hit outside one end or the other of the spectrum. Now, most importantly is to be concise and clear. Tom Clancy said, try to keep it simple. Just tell the damn story. And this is not unlike what Tom Clancy's talking about. We want you to think, or I want you to think, it's truly not the royal we, I want you to think about an expanded 3-point essay. Everybody was taught that in grammar school or elementary school, because the concept is a good one, and it's still a good one in 2015. Now, it doesn't have to be 3 points, but you think about the basic structure of a 3-point essay. You have a good solid introductory paragraph, you've got your points laid out, boom, 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 and then you've wrapped it up at the end. So take that conciseness of that structure and write your article to fit it in there, because that's what it needs to feel like, in my opinion. It needs to feel like you have really thought this out and you know where you're going. Did anybody watch the Today Show this morning, just by chance? Did anybody see the interview between Matt Lauer and Brian Williams? Very interesting. You know, Brian Williams has been all this trouble about not quite being truthful. I'm not sure he helped himself today, but that's for neither here nor there. And Matt at one point says, Brian, tell us your story from, this isn't exactly right, but it's close. Tell us your story and how it, over the broad scheme of time, write the first sentence and write the last sentence. And I thought that was so interesting, because you've got to know where you're going before you write that first sentence. You can't just start, and we can tell when you do, you can't just start blabbing and getting it all out there, and then you're down at the bottom and you're trying to wrap it all up, and we've all got shaken baby syndrome from reading it, you know, because you're like, where are we going? So again, it's that know where you're going, be concise, think about that structure of a 3-point essay, even if you may have 12 points. It's that concept will keep you in line. There is a set of average word lengths out there that you will be told about when you submit an article. You need to stay in those. Those are really important, because the staff is actually juggling a certain number of words available to it in the entire publication. Maybe that's 5,000 words, I can't remember what that is. So if you're told write 1,500 words, don't send in 3,700 words, because all of a sudden now we might like to publish that, but you know, we're going to have to hold it and juggle it later, and maybe that point of law is really important now, may not be so important in 2 more months when we can wedge that one in, that sort of thing. So follow the instructions that you're given. We'll talk about that in a minute. Hear though what I'm not telling you. I'm not telling you if it's too long we won't publish it. That's not what I want you to take away. What I want you to take away is that extraordinary length is going to get extraordinary scrutiny on 2 levels. The physical layout of the magazine and the editorial board is going to look at it with extra care. We have published, shockingly, very, very long articles, but we've had to either delay them for a later publication, or we've had to divide them and almost do them like columns across a couple of things. But we talk to you about that before it happens. It's not something like, oh, well, here's the first part of my article. That's great news. You're going to know exactly what our issues are. We may even give you an opportunity to rewrite and shorten. If it's full of those footnotes, get rid of those footnotes to condense some space. But just know that the extra length is going to get some extra scrutiny. And then I come to Mark Twain. I want you to be correct. Mark Twain said, get your facts first so that you can distort them however you please. Get your facts straight. You need to know this board is a well-read, thoughtful crowd, and thoughtful in the sense of we really ponder your message when we get these, and we don't reject easily and we don't accept easily. It's a thought process that is very serious to us. You've taken the time to submit something to us, and we're going to take the time to really think through what you've submitted. But if you have sent something to us, I can tell you within minutes of it being disseminated to us, if somebody has found a legal error, you're toast. And one of a couple of things that is going to happen, in my experience, what has typically happened, and this is truly just me, I don't speak for the whole board on this, the minute I realize that you have either missed an important element of a case, you've missed an important statute, or you weren't up to date on something that happened in this particular area of the law since you submitted the article or even before you submitted the article, the minute I think that you have not accurately stated what a case or a statute says or means, woo, for me it's become an intellectual trust issue because we don't have time. You know, we all have our own practices. We're all doing our own things. So we're reading these articles early in the morning, late at night, at lunch, and there are lots of them a month. The minute I have a trust issue about whether you are really accurate on how you're handling this, my radar goes up and I'm out. It's real easy for me to say, everybody pause. And we'll either send it back to you with a question, which we've done once and we got a good rewrite on what had gotten left out, or we tell you no thank you. We can't go check all your sites. We can't go check every interpretation. So we're varied across all these disciplines of law. Somebody is going to know, all of us are going to know a little bit of something about what you're writing about, but somebody on that board is going to know exactly what you're writing about. So it's an educated audience that you're sending it to, so just be correct and be concise and take no liberties with interpretation, just very succinct and concise. It's also really important that you know that if you have read material in the construction of your article, and we're going to be looking too, if you have not given credit appropriately, you are not going to get that article published. It is very easy if you're reading a whole bunch of articles from other people to just slide something in that sounds like it's the voice in your head, but we're very sensitive to that. So we want you to be extraordinarily careful that you have not accidentally plagiarized something. And it sounds like this is such a simple element, but it's very easy to mess up. It's very easy if you've absorbed all this other data from all these other sources to send something back to us, because we do not want to get in that kind of argument with an outside source. The same is true with photos you send us. If you send us a photo of someone who is living, and we know it's not, and if you send us a picture of Abraham Lincoln, we're good. If you send us a picture of Suzanne Robertson, the director of the magazine, or the editor of the magazine, we're going to go require a written release from that person, and Suzanne does all that. It's very time consuming. So what you're sending, we want your pictures. This is not to discourage you, but you need to have let that person know that you've sent us a photograph, and you need to let them know that we're going to be looking for a written release to use it, that sort of thing. And if we can't get it, we can't publish it. So let's talk about, those are a whole bunch of do's. Let's talk about some don'ts. Don't slam the judges. Don't slam other lawyers. Don't hit the chancellors in an ugly way, or the justices. We understand that there can be intense conflict around a particular issue, especially when there's a big change happening. But you have got to be respectful in this publication just as you would if you were standing in front of that person. And sometimes we get things that make me think of sort of Mean Girls. Oh yeah, you'd text that to her, but you wouldn't stand in front of her and say it. And now that's a very simplified version because sometimes people are so frustrated that they would stand there and say it. But we're not going to publish that. And we're going to send it back to you and ask you to tone it down, or we're just going to tell you thank you anyway. Maybe there are other places you could get that published. So you got to be respectful. There are very respectful, good ways to get your conflict out there. But it's about the words you choose and the tone that you use. And you know, we have tone in writing just like we have tone in discussion. The higher the pitch of your article, the greater scrutiny it's going to get and the more anxiety it's going to give that editorial board. And that is not to say that we're scared of publishing something that's controversial. We will do that. But what we're not going to do is give an audience to slam a particular jurist or a lawyer. So you just got to be very mindful of that. We understand, but this isn't the place for that. Don't write us on a case you currently have pending in front of the Supreme Court. That makes everybody squirmy. We might think it's really important to talk about it, and perhaps there is a way to do that successfully where we would publish it. But it is a very uncomfortable feeling because it feels to us like an attempted manipulation of the piece of litigation that's sitting in front of a jurist somewhere. So if you have something really interesting in front of it, it would have to be a pretty analytical piece before we were willing to even go there. So ponder that. It's a very difficult thing for us to be able to publish. Don't send us an advertising piece. We know you're wonderful. We know you'd make a fabulous expert. We know that you are the best lawyer in your area of practice of anybody else in the whole world. But we're not going to publish that for you. If the minute it feels like an advertising piece or a PR piece, it hits the tank. And some of them don't even make it to us. I think they get clipped on the front end. We might get an email saying, we got XYZ from ABC. It's in the tank because it was a PR piece. So be mindful of that. There's a way to tout yourself a little bit without turning it into a PR piece or a big advertisement. But you got to be very careful because we're very careful around that. Now, I'm going to give you the biggest secret that the TB Journal that you can have for getting published in the TB Journal. Don't use an Oxford comma. Suzanne Robertson, will you stand? What she said was, you can use them, but she's going to take them out. You know what an Oxford comma is? Only us old English makers. Suzanne and the two Suzannes, but together we're Suzanne squared. We're the only ones who really care about the Oxford comma. The Oxford comma is this. Suzanne, comma, Barry, comma, and I have decided to go drink even though it's going to be 11:30 when we finish this seminar. The comma after the Barry is the Oxford comma. So there's a big conflict out there in the writing world about whether it ought to be Suzanne, comma, Barry, and Suzanne with no comma. But she's going to clip your Oxford comma, so you might as well just clip it before you send it in. It won't get in the way of your publication, by the way. We don't reject people for the use of the Oxford comma, although there was an attempt. I'm just saying. All right, let's talk about the process. Am I over time? Not quite. I'm all right? Okay. Let's talk about the process. Let's say you've jumped all these hurdles, you've done all these do's, you've avoided all these don'ts, and now your baby is ready for submission. Let's talk about how that works. The editorial board itself, you should know, there's 7 of us, plus wonderful staff at the TB Journal. You will send your article to Ms. Robertson, Suzanne Robertson, and if you want to note her email address, it's srobertson@tnbar.org. If you send it to her, also send her some spam and some funny cartoons that are relevant to no one, that sort of thing. Be sure and fill up her inbox. Or alternatively, if you can always go to the Tennessee Bar website, which is www.tba.org. And then once you're there, click on Publications. And it's going to send one of those scroll down menus. Is that what you call that, techies? When you just hover your cursor over it and it pops down. And underneath that, you're going to see Tennessee Bar Journal. Click on that from the pull down menu. And then over on the right side of that page, you're going to see journal links. And then under that, you're going to see submit an article. And all these instructions are there for you in case you forget them. but you're going to attach your article and submit it to Suzanne Roberts in that way too. But here's some things that we'd like to have from you in addition to your article. Number one, we'd like a hard copy as well that is double spaced. That's really nice to get that, and Suzanne may ask you for that if you have not followed up your electronic submission with that. We want a bio sketch on you. We want to know who you are, where you are, who you practice with, and we want to know a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about you and why you've written this article. Now, this is not, we don't want a page, we want a paragraph of who you are, why this is important to you, why you think we ought to publish it. We also want the following information. Have you submitted this article somewhere else? If so, tell us. We're not going to find that you have submitted it if they haven't published it. If you've published it somewhere else, tell us that, because we are going to find that, and that can be a problem. It's not always a problem, but it can be a problem. Once you have submitted your article to us, if it has not been published or submitted elsewhere, don't. Just sit tight for a little while. If you submit it to us and you submit it here, there, and yonder, you're going into editorial limbo. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to publish this article if so-and-so is going to publish it. So now we're going to wait out to see, we're going to play this game of chicken. Who's publishing, who's not publishing. So you're just throwing yourself into this limbo that we now have to wait out, or we may ask you, well, can you go retract here and retract there, and then we'll publish if we know we want to publish. So if you haven't done it, don't disseminate it out all at one time, which I think if you're a writer at all and you've done books, authors will send the manuscripts out to multiple publishers at one time, and that works in that world, but it's very difficult in ours. The address of the TBA office is on the website as well, but it's the Nashville office if you need it. And here's what happens after you've jumped all those hoops. Suzanne then we have our own listserv, and Suzanne sends out the article to all of us at one time. And she also sends us whatever bio or information you sent us, and she'll also send us whatever she's found out that you didn't tell us. So if she found it that you published it over here and you didn't tell us, and or maybe you did tell us that you submitted it over here before you submitted it to us, all of that info is going to come to us, and we noodle around on that as we noodle around on the substance of your article. Once it comes out to us, it takes a little time, so don't be anxious. This isn't something that happens quickly. We're not sitting at our desk waiting for the next email from Suzanne to be able to edit your article. We're in court, we're in mediation, we're with clients. We're doing other things as well, although this board is stunningly prompt most of the time at responding to the articles. So keep in mind that there's 7 of us, and we're reading and we're often talking to each other about what we liked and didn't like via this listserv. And sometimes there's a phone call. Sometimes we'll all get on the phone once a month and we'll talk through the pros and cons, especially if there was a problem or if there was a sort of a split decision, so to speak, on whether the problem was important or not important, or half liked, half didn't like, and we'll talk it through. So once we've done that, then Suzanne Robertson is going to contact you, and she's going to tell you one of a couple of things. Yay, we're going to publish you, and roughly when we're going to do it, or no thank you, we appreciate your work, good luck to you. Or we may say, you need to rewrite. And our areas of concern are A, B, and C. I don't think I've ever seen one just go where we say, okay, rewrite that, good luck. You need to know what we're worried about. You need to know what our concern is so that you can fix that if you want to. You obviously don't have to, but if you want to, you at least know where our worries were and you can focus there. Or we may just want you to edit, or we may just want you to remove footnotes, something like that. You'll also be given a tentative deadline by which we need that back, because then again, we're back to just the formatting of the physical magazine. So you're going to want to be very mindful of that, whatever deadline she gives you, and do that. Here's a little don't in this regard of the process, though. Don't pressure your buddies who are on the editorial board. I don't have the power to vote your article in. No one on the editorial board does. So all it does is make me exceedingly uncomfortable to get your article saying, oh, we're BFFs and have been for the last 20 years, even though I hadn't seen you in 6 months. Make sure my article gets published, or are y'all going to publish it? Are y'all going to publish it? It's just uncomfortable, and it's not productive. and I may or may not even forward it on, and you're going to get pablum back. You're going to get, oh, my fingers are crossed for you, or, you know, it's out there. I don't know what anybody else's thoughts are. The other Suzanne will contact you as soon as we know, you know. So don't pressure friends and neighbors, because it's really a process that's out of our hands as individuals. And don't torture Suzanne either. She's going to do the same thing to you. The minute that an article has passed muster or has been identified as having the following problems, you're going to know. There's no delay there, because we got a magazine to get out, and everybody wants it done as timely as we can. I'll close with a quote from Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's one of my favorite. Easy reading is damned hard writing. So work hard, be concise, be correct, follow the rules, and avoid the don'ts. Thank you. Any questions? There's a troublemaker in the crowd. We have a question. What is it, Bob?
Suzanne, is there a particular policy once you publish it in the journal about republishing on blogs or places? Is an ad hoc?
Okay, the question was, is there a policy, once we've published it, is there a prohibition, I guess, on you publishing it on your blog or somewhere else? And I don't think there's a prohibition, Suzanne. I think that what's going to happen is, not on your blog, obviously, because you're in control of that, but what's going to happen is those other people who might publish it are going to want to know that we did publish it. So, anything to add, Suzanne?
I would just add that when your article is accepted, you will sign an agreement, letter with us so that we hold the copyright to that, but that letter says at that point you can use it on your own workplace, school, whatever. At that time, if you ever want to use it or send it to someone else, all you have to do is ask, and then we give permission all the time as long as it just says where it came from. So we're really liberal with that, allowing.
And
Recently, a couple of contexts. One is used by law schools, and the other is used by some of these law firm marketing networks that have their websites to post content.
can you hear what Buck is saying? That sometimes the law schools want to use it, or law firms want to use it to get the content?
Right.
Yeah, and what Suzanne is saying, if you couldn't hear, is just ask. Just ask. And Suzanne, they can also put a link to the TBA. You know, all the articles are online, which is another good thing to do. If you've thought of an idea, instead of just Googling, go to the TBA website and look at the past issues and all the articles that are there. Is somebody already written on it? But you can also figure out how to connect the link back to the TBJ so that your article is getting some traffic there.
Are the word limitations in the instructions?
No, they're not, and here's why. He says, are the word limitations in the instructions? I think in the instructions on the side it says the absolute total maximum under any circumstance is 5,000 words, but that's an extreme situation, which is, I think 5,000 words is 20 pages or something. It's crazy. But what's going to happen, because it's such a fluid thing, we know for this month we need this many words. Suzanne is going to tell you exactly what we're looking for in terms of word count. If it's not written, if you've already written it, we're going to address it in, okay, we'll publish it not in July, but we'll look at August. You'll hear that. There's one more question?
Yes, I thought I had heard once before that sometimes it's good to submit a story idea or an article idea in advance of the article. How does that work?
Can you all hear the question? Sometimes, do we want to have story ideas? And the answer is yes. We love those. Now, we're not going to pre-approve those, so if you write us and you say, I have this great idea to do this article on the impact of the federal stuff on same-sex marriage, would you all publish something like that? What you're going to get back from us is a very nicely worded response that basically says, write it and we'll see. You know, write it. If it's something that we would not be interested in, the example of how the DUI laws work in Wyoming, and we don't have any Tennessee or federal connection to it, you're going to get told, probably not, but thank you. Yes, sir?
Do you ever take any of the more controversial ones you're talking about and tell them to shift it maybe into a letter to the editor format?
Okay, the question is, do we ever take any of the more controversial issues and ask them to reformat it, such as a letter to the editor or something else? I don't think we've ever done that. We haven't grappled with it in terms of it being a controversial issue that turns into a letter to the editor. But we have said, we think that your article is better off as a letter to the editor, but not necessarily because of controversy. Or we'll say, this is not something we're interested in, but it's very well written, and we think so-and-so might be interested in it. You might consider publishing it there. So we'll be helpful if we think it just doesn't fit for us. We won't, you know, but we think someone else might like it, we'll tell you.
Also done kind of point counterpoint methods.
Oh, Barry mentioned the point counterpoints that you see. So that's how we have typically handled a very controversial issue. Or I think one time when something was actually pending, perhaps in front of our Supreme Court, don't hold me to that, but I think we did, where that's how we dealt with balancing out what was initially feeling like a manipulative piece or a manipulative circumstance, is we allowed them to do their point, and then we found a counterpoint and we published them together. Which is a great idea you can do on your own. If you've got something controversial, find a partner to write the other end of it. Any other questions? All right, thank you all.